everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I'm going to be talking about a specific type of revision and thing you might encounter in revision, and that is revising a character arc. I know you guys want me to talk more about my own revision process, and this is something I had to do with my latest book, and it was a really intensive revision because of this, and so I thought it would be interesting to kind of dig into what this means. I do think that revising character arcs is less talked about. So often when we chat about revision, we talk tons about, changing your plot around. But so often when we dig into a book and really mess with the bones of a book, we're really doing character work. And character work is some of the hardest work. So when you are revising a character arc, what you're really doing is revising an emotional arc. Every book should have an emotional arc. Alongside your plot arc, you have character arcs and growth and the emotional arcs that go along with it. You're taking your character on a journey at the same time as your plot is rising, cresting, and falling. So tweaking a character arc and the emotions they have, the reactions they have, the things they do in any given scene can completely transform your novel. Because you're essentially changing the emotions that your readers experience and the emotional experience they're having while following your character on a journey. If you're getting notes from readers or an editor about character agency or motivations not being clear, or, a villain who isn't just quite landing, or, a character that you feel is very important but they don't think is important, you're probably looking at a character arc revision. So a character arc revision can be really intensive and therefore really scary, and this is because if you're changing a character, typically you're changing them from the onset. You're tweaking who they are, how they're going to react to things, and this causes all sorts of ripples around them. Because if they're going to have a different response to something in the beginning, for example, it's going to create ripples of, if they respond differently, other characters would have to respond differently to them, and then maybe the plot changes. And so because it's so intensive and scary and doing this does cause a lot of ripples, I do think sometimes writers don't tackle these big character arc revisions because they are scary and they can fundamentally change the DNA of your book. But I think if you're willing to tackle this kind of revision, the totally new book that you end up with can end up being so much better than what you had originally envisioned. So that's me giving you the pep talk to give it a go. Don't be afraid to challenge your own ideas about your characters, who they are, and what they're going to do in your book. To give you more insight into how this impacted me and what I had to do. So, my second book is a persuasion retelling set in space. So I knew that I had two former lovers who had had a falling out and been apart for many years who were going to be thrown back together. Now, I wrote it kind of exactly like the original, which was, it was kind of a cool, weird, slow burn. So the main character, her ex, comes back into her life and he's just very cold to her, and she's unsure of everything. She makes a lot of assumptions about how he feels about her, and their interactions are just kind of tense, and that kind of, ripples and builds throughout the book until, conflict and tension and stakes and romance. What I ended up doing was changing the backstory and motivation of my love interest. I gave him more of an agenda. And because now he was coming into the story with more of an agenda, where he was intentionally trying to hurt the feelings of my main character, all of a sudden, I had a hate to love arc, not a cold indifference to love arc. And because I was changing the motivation and the agenda and the backstory of my love interest, this changed the entire romance arc, and indeed the character and emotional arcs from almost the first page, because all of a sudden my main character is reacting to someone being intentionally mean and upsetting to her. Through this, I ended up discovering all sorts of really interesting things. It made me really dig deeper into the character of my love interest because, now he was doing quite upsetting and awful things, but also it forced me to give my main character, my female protagonist, a lot more agency because she had to actively react to a lot more conflict, a lot more things being thrown in her way, and so she had to kind of pick yourself up and find a lot of new and interesting solutions to these challenges. I really enjoyed the changes that this sparked in all of my characters, but especially the main two and the romance arc. But this ended up being a major rewrite of the book because, of course, now every single scene in which they had interacted up to more or less the midpoint, I was bringing them up to the same place, had to change because now they had new history. All of a sudden, a scene in the middle, well, there's baggage from the second chapter that didn't exist before. So I had to acknowledge that and kind of shift and change things. So that's just to give you an idea of the kind of revision work you're gonna have to end up doing when you are altering a character arc. But ultimately, it's worth it. My book now has a lot more conflict. The arc is way more interesting, and I adore Hate to Love, and I think the readers are gonna definitely enjoy the romance a lot more because there's a lot more going on. So to speak further to revising character arcs, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the things that you need to consider when you are doing one. So are you changing someone's motivation kind of like how I changed the motivation of my love interest? In changing someone's motivation, typically you're going to change their agenda. Every single character should have their own agenda because every single character should theoretically be a living, breathing human who sees themselves as the hero of their own story. So you need to keep in mind, all right, so now that I've changed their motivation, what is their agenda? What do they want out of things? And therefore, how will they react to these other characters in these other situations with this new motivation and this new agenda? Coupled with this, you have to think of personality. So part of a character arc could be personality. Maybe the notes that you're getting are, oh, that character's a real drag. They need to stand up for themselves. Often that'll come as an agency note as well. So you might have to tweak their personality. Does that mean that they talk back more? Does it mean that, they use humor as a shield? You have to think about the personality because this impacts how they react to things. When someone says something nasty to them, are they going to immediately clap back or are they going to retreat? So you have to think about personality and how you might want to change someone's personality and how they're going to react to things scene to scene. A character's temperament and style is also really going to impact your dialogue choices. Something you might encounter with editing a character arc is, well, maybe too many of your characters are bantery and funny, and you have to kind of adjust characters so that they stand on their own as, characters and they don't all feel like cookie cutters of each other. So you'll think about their temperament and their style and then adjust their dialogue as needed. Another thing you can bear in mind when you are working on a character revision is, what is this person keeping a secret? Giving a character an interesting secret can add all sorts of layers and dynamics to any given scene or your story as a whole. Giving them a new secret, so you wrote a draft and you realized, well, this all comes back to motivation. What is that character's motivation? Maybe they're keeping a secret. Now, as you're writing the book and you're writing scenes, especially if the character with a secret is not your main character, so of course your character doesn't know what their secret is, you can keep in the back of your mind, okay, they have this secret, so they're going to carefully respond to this question or this situation to say something so that what they say has a double meaning. Making these sorts of changes to your character arcs, giving them all sorts of secrets, can then impact your foreshadowing and your plot. Whenever you revise, it's always going to connect to something else. It's all about dominoes. And so changing your character is almost always going to impact your plot as well as foreshadowing and continuity. And so really all of this comes down to reactions, as I've already mentioned with a couple of these. In making changes to a character, it's always going to change how they observe and react to things. And that's where you're going to find interesting new fodder for how scenes go, how plots develop, and yeah, you might have to make a lot of changes. But these are things to bear in mind when you are working on changing a character arc. Make one change to someone's temperament, personality, backstory, motivation, agenda, give them a secret, and you change everything. When you do make these decisions and these changes, you start from the earliest point in the book where this character would come into play. And if you are revising your main character, you have my sympathies. I have done it too, because it means you're basically revising the entire book. But maybe this character doesn't show up until like chapter 5, and so you only have to start there, and then you make the first change. It creates the ripples that it's going to create, and then you work your way through the rest of the book to take into account all of the new information. To track these changes scene to scene and chapter to chapter, you want to keep kind of a running tally in your mind, or maybe even write it down, some of the changes and ripples that you've made. Did you have them say something new to someone that they might feel guilty about? Or did you give them a new secret and so they dropped a hint, or they did something that makes another character suspicious, and so you're going to have to carry that through other scenes? You should always have a pretty good reason for why someone is doing something, especially something new, so that you can wrap it all up and tie it all up later. Essentially, when you're making changes, you want to ensure that you've given the character an arc that actually arcs. And I will say one note about revision. Sometimes you do this just to basically fix what you didn't get right the first time. You end up with an Act 3 where someone is making confessions or doing something really, really dramatic, and you realize, oh geez, I didn't build to this at all. So sometimes these arcs, you're basically inserting earlier on the things that are going to lead up to whatever is happening in your third act. So this is all to say that characters have a huge impact on story, and revising character arcs is a very daunting task, but a rewarding one. As I said, you can completely change the DNA of your story by making small tweaks to various characters. And often all it takes is changing one character and it ends up impacting your other characters. Once you have one person behaving in a completely different way, it throws a real wrench into the works, and all of a sudden you're having to pivot and solve problems in all these scenes and chapters, and it can sometimes alter the arc of your plot for the better. So don't be afraid to push up your sleeves, dig in, and do some character work. Let me know down below in the comments any questions you have about revising character arcs and emotional arcs. I love talking about revision and about character revision, and I'm sure there's tons that I'm leaving out. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and it lets me know that I should make more videos about revising and solving problems in your manuscript. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week, all about writing, craft, YA, traditional publishing, and books. Thank you so much for watching, and as always guys, happy writing!